Good morning, everyone. Sorry I'm late. I'm hoping to get this in the morning, so here we go. Global News is reporting there was an active shooter. Why didn't Nova Scotia send an emergency alert? Good question. Good question. Tony Gibbs, a resident of Wentworth, Nova Scotia, a town where some of the attacks allegedly occurred in last weekend's mass shooting, said he and his wife were frightened when they learned that there was an active shooter loose in their community. To have the kind of event happen here in rural Nova Scotia, it was shocking and scary, he said. We didn't have any idea that was happening other than the fact that we knew there was somebody running around, possibly still in our local area. Gibbs is also concerned by how he and his wife found out about the shooter, a call from their neighbor rather than a province-wide alert. At least we would have been aware had an alert come across our phones, Gibbs said. On Monday, the RCMP said police were searching through 16 different crime scenes, including the remains of 5 burned-out buildings. The RCMP confirmed at least 23 people had been killed, but added that there will likely be more victims found as crime scenes are further investigated. The RCMP could not, however, explain why an emergency alert wasn't issued to warn Nova Scotians of the threat posed by an active shooter who could not be found. It's a good question, and I don't have an answer for you at this moment, said RCMP Chief Superintendent Chris Leather during a Monday press conference. Leather was asked twice to explain why the province's alert system, which experts say uses radio, television, and cellular networks to warn residents of serious threats to health and safety, including active law enforcement responses, wasn't used. Quote, "We've relied on Twitter because of the instantaneous manner that we can communicate. We have thousands of followers in Nova Scotia and felt that was a superior way to communicate this ongoing threat." It's almost worse that they made that as a conscious decision and not like, oh my goodness, we just didn't realize. They have 91,000 followers. Population of Nova Scotia is 971,000 people as of 2019. So 10% of the population follows Twitter, and I'm willing to bet that they would expect more than just a tweet. You think? And I mean, most people expect more than just a tweet, I think. Back to this. Relying on Twitter was just an absolute mistake. Here is the commissioner, RCMP Commissioner Lucky, and this is to underline the further failures of people who have been appointed by this Liberal government. Commissioner Lucky answering this question. Here you go.
Been raised is about the fact that while there was information sent out on Twitter, there was no sort of public alert sent out through the telephone over the course of this incident. And I wonder if that's something that you're looking into now. If you have any questions about whether that might have helped preserve public safety.
I do say that in any incident such as this, we always have to look back at what we did. Nobody can lose their life in vain, and Heidi will not lose her life in vain, nor will the 17 other victims. We have to ensure that whatever happened there, if there's always going to be a better way to do things. And so if we can take this and move forward and find a better way to advise the public. But I have to say, in these incidents, they are so dynamic and they are so quick. And it was just over 12 hours that all of this took place. And it was, there was a lot of 15 different crime scenes. So you can imagine the dynamic nature of this. But again, we look at all the criminal side. And then, of course, we look at sort of the administrative side of all of that to say, what could we have done better to make Canadians safer? Because that is ultimately our goal.
So, I mean, there's a couple of things they could have done better, right? Just off the top of my head. Off the top of my head, one or two things, right? I mean, it's low-hanging fruit. And it's offensive that this government is like, oh, we're just going to move forward and hopefully next time we don't make that same mistake again and they didn't die in vain. It just seems empty, doesn't it? It does. Here's more questions, again, than answers on this one. This is running and it shouldn't be. Hold on. More questions than answers again on this one. So this is Andrew Lawton. He's tweeting, quote, "Bill Blair answers a question directed to the RCMP commissioner, attempts to speak to what the RCMP commissioner is thinking, then says it's inappropriate to share a pretty key detail about the Nova Scotia shooter." Here we go. And how is this acceptable?
With regard to the firearm license, I wouldn't think that anything investigative would hinge on that. If you could tell us whether or not that individual did have or did not have a firearm license.
Tim, as we've indicated, the RCMP are in the earliest hours and days of this investigation, and it's a complex one. And I think it's quite appropriate for them to be careful about the release of information until they've had the opportunity to verify it and confirm it. And so it is, I think, inappropriate. And the Commissioner would quite naturally be very reluctant to reveal details of that investigation until it is complete. And so I would urge Canadians to be patient with the RCMP as they do a very difficult but very important job for us in getting all the facts, in confirming their evidence, making sure that all of the steps to preserve that evidence are taken. Canadians deserve answers. The families and the victims of these terrible crimes deserve accurate answers. And so let us be patient while the RCMP conducts their investigation, confirms their evidence, and then I am absolutely confident they'll be transparent and forthcoming with that once that important work has been done.
Weird, right? Once that important work has been, like, you'd think that it would be a quick lookup, like, oh, yep, he had one, or nope, he didn't. And there's speculation he had an assault charge from the early 2000s, so people say that he couldn't have had an RPAL or an RPAL. Some people think that he could have had a PAL. I don't know. PAL is the restricted, or is the license to have a weapon. Here's Elizabeth A. Morris, and she is tweeting, retired Government of Canada microeconomic. Okay. So she says, the RCMP didn't request an emergency alert. We've relied on Twitter. And so that's just another point to this whole thing. Sorry, that should have been at the beginning. And CTV News is saying, why was no emergency alert issued during the rampage in Nova Scotia? And there was one part that I wanted to highlight. When pressed on Monday as to why such a request wasn't made, Nova Scotia Premier Stephen McNeil simply said it was because he wasn't asked to do so. Well, the Emergency Management Office needs to be ordered to put that out. Public Health ordered us to put the COVID one out. We were happy to support them. We have people in and ready, but we were not asked to put out that alert on the weekend. So, I don't know. Failures among failures among failures, right? And I'm sorry it's a short video today, but this is the last story. And I mean, I've stayed away from this other than to highlight these kind of weird things. I mean, you'd think that they'd want to tell people this was happening. You'd think that they'd want to inform people that somebody was impersonating a police officer with a very convincing looking car and very convincing uniform to boot, and probably guns, right? Like, considering the carnage that was wrought. So you'd think they'd want to tell people. Why didn't they? And you'd think they'd maybe have a better answer than we thought Twitter was good enough. Who's in charge here? Like, really? You thought Twitter was good enough? There's an emergency system in place for emergencies. That didn't qualify? The woman was saying, Miss Lucky was saying, like, oh, if only it was so dynamic, it was changing so fast. Yes, if only you had an instantaneous way to communicate with the general public, right? Across a large area. Oh, you do. And you didn't use it. And you can't explain it. You can just explain away that it was so dynamic that you couldn't possibly think, not once over a 12-hour period. Why did it take so long? Why did nobody do anything to warn the general public other than a few tweets? There's a lot more questions than answers. A lot more questions than answers. Okay, here's the last story for this morning. CBC News is reporting Trudeau confirms some cargo planes sent to China for pandemic supplies returned empty. Evan Solomon holds Ahmed Hassan to account for this, but hold on a second. Here we go. A cargo jet chartered by the federal government to deliver badly needed personal protective equipment, PPE, from China was forced to leave the airport in Shanghai without the shipment on board. The precious cargo of pandemic supplies wasn't lost or bought out by another country. Instead, the government says delays caused by a spike in cargo flights meant that delivery trucks couldn't get to the Canadian plane on time, forcing it to return to Canada without its load. Quote, this occurred due to on-the-ground congestion caused by a significant surge in cargo flights out of terminals at the Shanghai airport. As a result, the intended cargo was unable to get to the plane before its required takeoff time, said Emily Harris, Director of Communications at Public Service Procurement Canada. The cargo still belongs to Canada, and it's in a leased warehouse in Shanghai, and the government says it will deliver on a later flight. In addition to the empty federal plane, a cargo jet leased by an unidentified provincial government also flew back to Canada yesterday without its cargo for the same reason. The missed deliveries are a setback for Canadian procurement efforts, but such supply interruptions don't mean the fragile PPE supply chain is completely broken. Harris said 4 flights arrived from China over the weekend carrying medical supplies, including N95 and surgical masks, protective coveralls, and one key component in reagents for novel coronavirus testing. Those planes also carried supplies ordered by the province of Quebec and the Red Cross. Scroll down a little bit. Here's Justin Trudeau talking about this. So Justin Trudeau warning, we're going to go for about 48 seconds. Anyway, about a minute if you want to fast forward.
I got more information on the issue around the two planes that landed empty yesterday. One was a Government of Canada charter. The other was chartered by a specific province for one of their orders. There are severe restrictions on the ground in China in terms of how long a plane can actually stay in their airports before having to leave, whether it's full or not. And at the same time, supply lines and truck shipments to the airports are difficult and interrupted by checkpoints and quarantine measures. For the most part, we've been able to navigate through those and ensure that Canada has received the equipment that it needs, but these two airplanes were forced to take off empty.
And I'll leave it there. You can hear more about that. But here's Evan asking Ahmed Hassan. This is yesterday at 5:42 p.m. Today is the 22nd. And here we go. It says, why did two planes headed to China for essential supplies return empty-handed? Evan, take it away.
To get equipment from China, and they came home empty-handed. Like, how does that happen? How do we send a plane to China and then they say, sorry, that the supplies are gone? Can you explain how that happens?
No, it wasn't a question of the supplies being gone, Evan. The Prime Minister addressed this question in his press conference, and he indicated that the problem is that, China has strict requirements on how long planes can be on the ground in their airports. So after a short period of time, our planes had to take off because the supplies were taking a long time to get to the airport. But we will continue to follow up on those orders. We are continuing to deliver orders to provinces.
So everybody's saying the same thing, just a scheduling problem. They couldn't get the supplies to the plane on time, and just a little bit of wasted fuel. Don't worry about it, everybody. Everybody's going to get their PPE eventually from China. And I have some other stories there was other stories recently talking about how masks from China weren't working very well, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that would have been a nice bookend, but I don't have time to find the link right now, so I apologize. Thank you for watching. Check out CanadaPoly.com. Check out CanadaReport.co, and have a wonderful, wonderful